What's up, my dudes? I'm going to make a video on developing hip strength as it pertains to a squat. This is something I put a lot of thought into because my hips and upper back are by far the limiting factors on my own squat. So this is something I've done a lot of trial and error on, and I'm going to report back on what I believe are the effective ways to address it that you can try yourself. The first of three categories that I'm going to give you is the one you don't want to hear, that I didn't want to hear. I finally did, and it paid off, is executing more squat. The best way to address a technical breakdown in your squat is to perform more squats without the technical breakdown. Obviously, you have to alter your loading parameter to do that, but ingraining that motor pattern and progressing a technical 1 rep maximum over time is a very effective way to do that. And the other one is doing, I believe, a properly executed pause squat where you're not just bottoming out and you're keeping tension through your hips, keeping tension in your hamstrings, and you're maintaining your position and then manually reversing the weight. You're not getting a dip after the pause to get it going again. It has a lot of value because you're maintaining the most stressed position on your hips for an extended period of time. So you're expanding the time under tension in the most specific possible way on the hip muscles that are failing you. And then you really want to focus on driving it out of the hole without a dip in your hips and without your knees shooting in to get you going. And be able to generate that force out of the hole without your knees caving is a motor pattern and skill that you have to build up over time, as well as the strength. The second category is picking a motion to be trained with a wider than competition width stance. This is something I've had a lot of success with. Wider than competition. It's just like when people say close grip, is just as long as it's closer than your competition grip, it's a close grip because it's a different stimulus. This is much the same. And then you want to be really careful when loading these, because if you have weak hips to where you're caving narrow, you definitely don't have strong enough hips to be taking this wide stance. So you start them really light and for higher volume, and you build them up and you take your time. A couple things being, I've seen people have success with touch and go sumo deadlifts in this category, or wide stance box squats. I just don't like them. Not even me assessing their effectiveness. I just don't like doing box squats, so that's not what I did. And something as simple as wide stance goblet squats is something I've actually had a couple people have a fair bit of success with, really focusing on maintaining the proper hip mechanics throughout a high rep set, because as soon as you start just banging out reps arbitrarily, you're losing out on about, half of the benefit. And having it front loaded and you're more upright, I believe is going to require more strength and a more open hip gait to achieve depth. Not that anyone cares about your depth on a goblet squat, but I would say practical implication here is training maybe as a warm-up, but also actually training it hard. No one wants to train a goblet squat hard because they look silly, but actually training a wider than, and I'd say wider than is the widest you can achieve a vertical shin width, wider than competition width goblet squat, in addition to the pause squats, really focusing on how you're breaking the squat out of the hole. And then the third category is actually directly developing your adductors, abductors, glute minor, blah, blah, blah. There's a lot of ways to do this depending on what equipment you have access to, anything from a hip circle or just band around the knees. The adductor abductor machine, as silly as it looks and no one wants to do, I believe it does work, especially if you do it leaned forward. The muscles it recruits within your hip are different. That's an anatomical thing, and it also makes it, I think, actually have some pertinence to how it affects the squat. Whereas if you lean back, I don't feel that being the same effect. But the takeaway on these is doing something. I don't know how much of it is even mental, but just doing something to address those muscles directly over time and being consistent with it will eventually start showing up in your squat. They're not cool and they don't show up immediately, which I think people bail on them and say that they don't work. But even the little stuff of just isolating a lagging muscle repeatedly over time will have a drastic effect if carried out over a long enough period of time. So I think those are the three. I know the first one isn't really a cool accessory, but I think if you address it on those three planes, you can develop your hip strength fairly quickly, fairly safely, And when I say hip strength, a lot of that is just preventing knee cave, but I'm not using that terminology because that can spawn from other reasons other than just sheer hip strength.